Jeff, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You got it. All right, man. Let's get right into it, down and dirty. Give me a quick brief about yourself, how you got into the crypto space. What were you doing before, and kind of like where are you now?
Yeah, man. I'll give you the quick 15-year journey to crypto. So my background is marketing, advertising. Been in the sort of the enterprise agency world for almost 15 years. Got my start just actually marketing on MySpace, believe it or not. So I really sort of grew up through the Web 2 movement and saw that from sort of start to what I wouldn't say finish, but to where it is today. And so that was super fun. Loved sort of the birth of a new industry and new models for brands and creators. But ultimately, Web 2 started to feel a little stale. And a little over a year ago, I came across the concept of social tokens and personal tokens. And those keywords kind of triggered for me that crypto and blockchain and Web3 was starting to enter a phase that was more relevant to someone like myself, someone who's not in finance, someone who's not a coder or a developer by any means, but someone who builds online communities, builds brands, and builds experiences. So sort of that combination of writing an industry and riding the ups and downs of all of that, to then wanting to be at the start of sort of the next wave of what internet communities could look like. And yeah, here we are today. And yes, it's getting off to a good start.
I love it. And you brought up a cool keyword. Web 2 is feeling stale. What about Web 2 is feeling stale to you?
So it's funny because a lot of the sentiment around Web 3 was the exact same sentiment that Web 2 had circa 2000 to 2008, which is we're removing the middlemen. The intermediaries are going away. And at the time, the intermediaries weren't Amazon, Google, Facebook. The intermediaries were the large print publications, the large TV networks, and things of that nature. And so, that sentiment was super important for me because as someone who enjoys building brands, the number one thing you want to do is connect a brand to a consumer, deliver a great product and a great experience, and grow that relationship. And Web 2 promised that, which is the same promises Web 3 is making right now. So I hope we don't make the same mistakes. But then over the years, what happened? Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, they all became these huge intermediaries. So we just got centralization and intermediaries all over again. And immediately you start to feel as though you have handcuffs on. So 2010 to 2017 was sort of the heyday. It felt like there was a lot you could do in Web 2. And then the last 3 years, the clamps have just started to come down. And it just felt like we were in handcuffs and it felt stale.
So you brought up a point. Web 2 aimed to do what Web 3 is doing right now, but people just built quote unquote data monopolies and these huge islands that were gated and people became the product, and very much so what we're experiencing right now, obviously. What do you think is happening in Web 3 that's taking change into their own hands, right? Like what are users kind of like experimenting with from a point of view to make sure that Web 2 doesn't happen over again? What are you seeing?
It seems like social tokens, brand tokens, community tokens, they go by a lot of terms, but I like social tokens as sort of the catch-all. And NFTs, again, a little bit adjacent to the world of social tokens, but you can still build communities around both. It's really the ability for the end user to control their access to a community, not decentralized platforms. So right now, if there's a big community in a Facebook group or in a Reddit group, how do you mobilize 1 million people if they don't like how they're being treated on one platform? How do you mobilize them and migrate them to another platform? There's really no way to do that. And so that creates data lock-in, network effects lock-in, and the innovation sort of stops. And so putting tokens in the hands of the end user and then allowing themselves to organize around the token and not necessarily the UI or the platform or the database for at its simple or at its most granular level. Organizing around the token allows just freedom and mobility across the internet. So as we start to see experiences, websites and apps built for tokenized communities, we essentially get this world of online tribes that can just move across the internet together. And that freedom is essentially, what I think is the polar opposite and counter position to Web 2, which is no ownership and very little freedom.
Right. And I guess we could both argue that we're part of that internet tribe that is working in a very much so decentralized manner, me through Mint, you through Jump, which we'll get to in a minute. But everybody kind of has their own entry into crypto, into Web3, right? What was yours? Did you first buy Bitcoin and realize, all right, what is this internet funny money? Was it through a blockchain use case? How did you get your start in the space?
Yeah, it's funny. My first awareness of Bitcoin was back in 2012, 2013. And being sort of a brand guy, if you will, and not someone who understands deep technology type stuff, the brand of Bitcoin was a bit off-putting to me. It just felt really scammy. It didn't feel right, just kind of seeing it on the surface. But the general idea of it was like, man, there's something here. And Bitcoin will kind of be the first experiment, and then we'll kind of see what comes after that. So definitely put a bookmark in it and kept track of it. And then as we approached 2016, as Coinbase sort of started to gain a lot of momentum, and you started to see this really nice brand kind of develop within the space that, brands can often give a lot of legitimacy and credibility, started to pique my interest again. So definitely leading up to the 2017 sort of craze and bubble is when I actually started to make some of my first purchases, obviously like super speculative, started devouring every video I could of Vitalik talking about the vision of Ethereum, along with every other sort of conference or video that had been sort of put out there, and, got super interested in it. And then obviously the ICO boom and the crash, and there's a lot of sort of cloudy fuzziness around kind of what was happening. And I wasn't deep into this space. So at the time I didn't see really the builders and the real use cases that were starting to form. So I didn't pay much attention to it. I was also highly consumed with building a business within the agency that I was working at and sort of scaling a Web 2 solution. So I really just poured all my focus into scaling a social media business. And then in 2020, it just kind of came to a head, and it was just like, man, this again, the Web 2 is feeling stale. I've scaled this business, but I don't really see, it doesn't seem a lot of fun to keep scaling. And then again, kind of come across the term social token and personal token. And then just the ideas started firing.
Sure. No, it makes a lot of sense. And, Jeff, you bring such a unique point of view to this entire discussion, mainly because, one, you saw not only the rise, but the existence of MySpace. And then you also saw that transition to Facebook. And pre-IPO Facebook is very different than post-IPO Facebook. And I think newcomers who like Gen Zs, right, that are coming into the space, they don't realize these problems, right? They're just end users. They're just a product at this point, right? And now we're seeing the rise of these new primitives, these new ideas, these new forms of one, community engagement, community building, and community ownership, and what it means to be a part owner in something that you use, right? Something that you contribute your time, electricity, resources, whatever, right? So when you're seeing the development of MySpace, right, you're being an internet community guy, right, an early user, You're seeing the growth of Facebook pre-IPO and how it kind of delivered a lot of its organic traffic before it went IPO, and the second it went IPO, that kind of like disappeared, right? Where are we right now in terms of where Web3 is to where Web2 was when you entered? What's the energy like right now? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I feel like Web3 social is 2000 to 2003. So like almost pre MySpace. Like if you go back before MySpace, Friendster was really
Right.
the thing that sort of led up to MySpace. And so I think we're pre MySpace. I don't even think we've seen, and it's tough to say like I don't think the next wave of social is platforms. I just that's too linear. It's linear thinking. It's like to think that there's going to be another MySpace. I mean, another Facebook that kind of dominates. Like that's why I'm not. We can get into BitClout, but I'm not big on just BitClout. Feels too linear. It doesn't feel like this exponential just sea change in what we're seeing. So I don't even think we're like we're like 2002 to around 2002.
Yeah, I could echo that. And just because you brought up BitClout for a minute, right? Obviously, and it's a point of discussion that I wanted to have with you more intimately, but we'll bring it up now. Obviously, BitClout is like that social experiment that hit the market, had all the backing of like the top investors that got it a lot of attention, a lot of early capital initially, and a lot of hype, right? Tokenizing the top 15,000 influencers on a social media platform, and then adding a twist of decentralization. It's going to get awareness, obviously. And like you said, we're at a stage right now where, okay, I like that because you're the first person to kind of tell me we're in that early 2003 phase, which basically means MySpace got started in 2003. BitClout is like that early iteration of what it could become. But chances are, or I don't know, chances are they might pivot, right, and become something else. Who knows? You can't really predict. Yeah. But when it comes to like these creators, right, and now let's get into the story of Jump, starting a social token. Yep. Just so people understand the difference between the social token that you started versus the ones that are on BitClout, why not launch Jump on BitClout?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main thing that I see with BitClout is it to me, it just felt Web 2. Like yes, it had this kind of underlying blockchain component. They tokenized the top 15, I think, 1,000 sort of influencers on Twitter. But everything about it felt so Web 2 to me. And to me, the social graph is completely built around the individual and not platform. And, you know, unless there's like a layer of BitClout that like I'm not sort of seeing, it still feels like they're trying to build the social graph around the blockchain itself. Sure. And it's like this, we went from a platform to a blockchain. And I don't think that's where it's going. I think the social graph is around the user. And right now, Ethereum seems to be the best place for an individual person to start to collect tokens and build their own social graph, right? And in that sense, you know, it still has all of the high level sort of beliefs and philosophies that BitClout is going for, but instead of trying to build around a very specific blockchain use case, you know, Ethereum is really allowing people to kind of create their own social graph. And to me, that seems like a bigger sea change, that we're building social graphs around people, not blockchains, and certainly not platforms.
Yeah, and I guess from that point of view, we're building social graphs around people, but blockchains are the underlying infrastructure that are making it possible, right? And just because we're already on this topic, right, I think it's fair point to now even introduce Jump, right? And I'd love to kind of hear the story because we've been kind of seeding at it and teasing it throughout this conversation. So really quick, tell me about Jump, the social token you launched, and Parachute, how those two kind of work in conjunction.
So to to set the stage, I've got to go back to 2005 again.
Yes, go for it.
So how'd I get into advertising? How'd I get into community building? I was in college at the time, wanted to go to the forefront of where I felt like consumer attention and consumer media were going. So very similar to the way a lot of sort of people who are graduating college and just entering Web3 right now. I was kind of doing the same thing in 2005. I was very big into skydiving at the time. Was making a lot of jumps at a local drop zone and just decided that I would start a MySpace page for Skydive Dallas. Didn't ask permission, just got into it, launched the page, started marketing Skydive Dallas on MySpace.
That's epic. That's epic.
In about a month, the manager came up to me at the drop zone, and I only had about 9 skydives at the time. So I was by no means sort of an expert, certainly was probably not qualified to be representing them on the internet. But he came up to me and he said, hey, we have these little comment cards. And at the bottom, it's to sort of ask about your experience and how you liked your skydive. But at the bottom, it says, how'd you hear about us? And it was like, check a box, radio, TV, outdoor, whatever. But there was a little note that you could write. And a lot of people started writing MySpace on there. And we were getting a lot of business from MySpace. And I found out you're the one running it. We should compensate you. And so that was sort of my first client. It was a barter deal, traded skydives for essentially social media marketing. That allowed me to make 1,800 jumps over the course of 11 years, which was just a blast. And so when I started to sort of move into the next phase of my career, and I started to sort of think about really what I wanted to do, I wanted to jump into Web3. That's as simple as it was. And I needed a parachute to do that. So parachute and jump were sort of born.
Wait, I love how it's that simple. Like that's the inspiration. You're jumping into Web3. Okay, interesting.
Exactly. And so when I think about, and I kind of am like, everybody needs a parachute to jump into Web3. That's kind of where we are at this stage. It's hard to do by yourself. You need a little help. I've certainly had help through my relationships at Seed Club. I'm gearing up Jump to help others in a similar fashion, but unique to a certain industry. So when I really started kind of preparing myself to actually jump in full time and leave the safety net of a big corporation, one of the things that I did is I just put together sort of a trends and research presentation, and I presented to just a bunch of smart advertising and marketing people. So think like senior digital strategists, founders of agencies, founders and CEOs of billion-dollar companies. And really the idea was, hey, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing this crazy, and this was before NFTs blew up. This was before anyone was really talking much about Web3 from a brand perspective. So sort of middle of last year, 2020, and the response I got from everybody, super senior people, incredibly smart agency people, was, man, this is fascinating. It's definitely the future. I see why we need it. I see the problems with Web2. I see the problems that this solves. I have no idea where to start. This is so foreign to me. It's like seeing the internet again for the first time. And so as I started to formulate, okay, well, that's the sort of the feedback. I did a little market research, if you will, light market research, just kind of talking to people. That's the feedback. What's most needed right now in my industry, which is Fortune 1000 brand marketing, enterprise agency services. And the answer was super plain obvious. It was, we need a community for the industry to come together, to start to learn, to start to set best practices, and ultimately build the products and services that this industry, that Web3 would sort of need. So that's where kind of Jump started to make a lot of sense, in being able to work with a bunch of agencies and brands and help them jump into Web3.
You know what this reminds me of? When like I'm a big fan of the history of the internet and the stages of the internet from Web 1 to Web 2 and now Web 3. And quick side tangent, I'm curious at what's going to make Web 3 irrelevant and what's going to eat Web 3, right? But we'll get into that even later. But what you're talking about right now, because we're so early in the stages of adopting more retail level type of Web3 tech, it reminds me a lot of like these early internet advertising bureaus, for example, right? Like the IAB, right? The Internet Advertising Bureau when mobile came out, right? The mobile bureaus that kind of helped and aimed to educate agencies and advertisers. And is that what the vision is here? Okay.
Yeah, it absolutely is, because when you look at the IAB in the 90s, if you wanted to learn about the internet, were you going to write a print article about it? Are you going to talk on the phone? No, you're going to build a website. You're going to start a blog. You're going to start an email. You're going to use the native tools of the space. And in doing that, just to build your community using the native tools, by default, you learn. The builders learn, the community members learn. And so when it came to like, what does an industry association look like for this age? It was, well, we need a token. Like if we don't launch a token and we don't interact with a token, we're essentially making a huge mistake in terms of how we're actually actively learning, not just reading articles and tweeting ideas. Like, let's actually actively learn. So that's where the really formalizing a community around a token became important. With that said, introducing a token is a different dynamic than an industry association that is really classified as a nonprofit, right? When you really look at like right. Structure and architecture. And so it's not really fair. It might even be a bit misleading to call Jump an industry association because of what that might mean. But it is completely fair to call it an industry community. And I think it levels up the ideas and the ethos of what a association wants to do, but I think it actually turbocharges it.
So with all these bureaus and associations, obviously they would monetize them, quote unquote, through probably membership fees, et cetera, education materials. I'm assuming, I don't know too much. I'm thinking out loud here, right? But really, this is a network effect type of thing. This is a community thing, and to get the resources to understand, to really get a better hold of what Web3 is, you're giving people that first step to buy their first token if they haven't already bought in Bitcoin or Ethereum, et cetera, et cetera. And with that, they get access into a community of like-minded people who are also after the same problems, solutions, challenges, et cetera, and going through that tunnel together. That's essentially what it is.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. And the one thing that I'll add to that is that to me, having a token isn't an either or in like a business model. I still think you can have sponsorships around a tokenized community, and we can get into what that means, especially when we're talking big Fortune 1000 brands and how they might interact with tokenized communities. I still think you can have online course material that's sold USD or some sort of stable coin. You can still have advertising and sponsorships. And I think there's a right way to do that within a tokenized community. And so we're talking about the yin and the yang, the Batman and the Robin, the peas and the carrots, two things that go together like really well, which is community equity in the form of a token and community cash flows in the term of all kinds of products and services that you can imagine.
Right. What's up, guys? Adam Levy here. Sorry for the quick pause, but I want to give some love to our 5 NFT sponsors who are making this episode happen. They are Coinvise, POAP, Cello, Social Stack, and PrimeDAO. First off, on Coinvise, you can create a personal or community-owned social token on Ethereum. Coinvise also helps you create incentives through token rewards and bounties, NFT business models, and bot integrations for Discord. Discover more by visiting coinvise.co today. Next up, we have POAP, or short for Proof of Attendance Protocol, who enables a novel way of creating one's life diary. Leveraging NFT technology, POAP facilitates an easy way to mint non-fungible tokens related to meaningful events. It's frequently used in crypto-native communities, and now it's starting to create NFT collectors in the mainstream too. Collect or launch your own POAP today by visiting poap.xyz. Next up, we have Social Stack, a platform for communities, brands, and creators to build mission-driven social token economies. Offering an easy-to-use, non-custodial wallet with a suite of open-source community engagement tools, Social Stack makes it simple to bring your community into Web3 and be a part of creating an open-source, gratitude-driven future for social tokens. Create a free social token wallet, discover mission-driven social token communities, or apply to launch your own token on Social Stack by visiting socialstack.co today. Next up, we have Cello. Are you looking for an ecosystem of dApps, currencies, and tokens that can connect you with people no matter their device, carrier, or country? Well, say hello to Cello, a mobile-first platform that makes crypto dApps and payments accessible to anyone with a mobile phone. Cello supports thousands of projects from builders, developers, and artists who every day build applications and issue tokens from all over the world. Visit celo.org today to learn more. And last but not least, we have Prime DAO, a collective of DeFi builders and DAO veterans attempting to turn DeFi into a more cooperative ecosystem by creating DAO-to-DAO interactions. The first solution to go live is Prime Launch, a launchpad experience for DAOs built in collaboration with Balancer. If you plan on launching a DAO, head over to prime.xyz to access a network of partners and tools that will jumpstart your DAO development today. All right, back to the episode. So my next point of discussion is everybody can launch a token, and these people that are joining your community will soon realize how easy it is and how quick it is and how cost effective it is to just launch an ERC20 or whatever the token standard is.
Yep.
But the hardest part behind launching a token is building that network effect, creating utility, creating value. How do you think about that? Is there a framework that you use in kind of deriving this value and creating perks, quote unquote, or talk to me more through that?
So really, you've got to figure out a way to create value around the token, like the value for holding the token, for using the token. And in that sense, a lot of the fundamentals of building businesses and building brands actually come into play. Granted, you have to translate that knowledge into the new tactical forms of like, what can you do at a very tactical level that's new and different. But the fundamentals are the high level strategy doesn't necessarily change. And the example that I'll give for that, because I think it's by far the best example, is Bezos's what he claims is Amazon's strategy. And it hasn't changed in 25 years. I think Amazon was founded in 94, which is the goal is to deliver products faster and cheaper. That's it. That's the strategy. It doesn't change. That's the business strategy. That's the brand strategy. Everything ladders up to faster and cheaper. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, you can introduce all kinds of tactics and components and ways to execute against that strategy. And so launching a token is not a strategy. That is not a new, you haven't unlocked some sort of new strategy. You have unlocked a new tactic. And that tactic is super powerful. And not a lot of people are using it right now. But the strategies are essentially, the high level mission is essentially the same. So if you looked at Jump's mission statement versus the IAB's mission statement in 1994, they probably look very similar, which is create a space for education and learning, create a space for people to meet and network, create creative best practices for building brands using Web3, and help start and sort of fuel the next generation of ad tech and martech, which, the whole new ad tech and martech stack has to be built for sort of Web3. And so that high level strategy is not probably that too different than many associations leading up, but how we do it and the tactics that we use are very, very different. So I would just encourage everyone who's considering launching a token to actually spend a lot of time thinking about just the good old-fashioned business plan.
Yeah, so that's a really good way to sum it. Faster products in the most cost-effective manner, right? Amazon strategy. Share with me more about what Jump strategy is, right? And what that like long-term roadmap kind of looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, creating a space to learn, creating an ability to network with individuals, and then creative best practices and sort of build Web3's ad tech and MarTech stack.
Right.
When you start to look at what a token does to that and how it kind of supercharges that, no industry association has ever been aligned with a token. Really, it's you pay a membership fee, you're a part of the community, and really the value you get is somehow extracting that value back towards the company that you're involved with. So if your goal is to kind of rise through the ranks and be president of the industry association, you actually still care more about your company than you do the association. You care about the association to the extent that it helps you in your own company. And what a token does is it aligns your company's success as well as the industry association success, because you essentially have stake in the social capital. Now, tokens, depending on how you design a social token and the purpose you give it, you can get in the crosshairs of the SEC and it can become a currency. But ideally, all social tokens that you launch, they are utility tokens. And you have to build that utility into it. Now, supply and demand takes effect over any good that can be traded, and price discovery can happen into sneakers or some sort of collectible, and those aren't necessarily securities. So the same thing can happen with a social token. And so when you think about sort of the future of what this industry community can look like, we can start to imagine a world where in every top agency, enterprise agency, so let's take just the top 200, several people holding a Jump token. And then you look at every marketing team within, Fortune 1000 brand, someone in there holding a Jump token. And then you look at Web3 ad tech and MarTech, people that are deep in the Web3 space. Imagine them holding a Jump token. And now you have these mega resources in the form of capital from Fortune 1000. You have incredibly creative minds at all these agencies that are just starving for new ways to do creative things. And then you've got all these innovators in the Web3 space, and they happen to all be aligned with a token. So there's a much stronger dynamic in terms of win-win across the board, because your stake is not just your own personal desire to benefit your own company. You actually want to see the community grow, and your tokens actually give you stake in that social capital.
So there's 2 point of views here. How do you prevent this from being an investor's paradise, right? Where they pump and dump and speculate on the behalf of Fortune 100s, 10s, agencies, whatever they may be. The capital that they put in there, how do you prevent investors from speculating on that, right?
Yeah.
And 2, how do you communicate that to people, right?
Yeah.
Like, we get it, right? We get it. We've seen the reality of what it could become, where it is right now. But agencies who are more, I guess, cautionary around crypto, how do you explain this stuff to them in a more, I guess, meaningful way that resonates with their level of understanding of crypto, beyond it being for criminals, beyond it being a stock market for random shit coins?
So the first question, how do you prevent investors from speculating on it? That question first is a premise that speculation is bad. I think it can cause some people who are new to the space and potentially holding Jump to seeing those wild price swings and a tokenized asset could be definitely alarming or concerning. And But I don't view speculation as bad. I think speculation serves a purpose. And and then also, I don't think you can even prevent, like once a token's liquid, like you can't prevent speculation. So it's just going to happen. And so really the idea is to not get distracted by your ultimate goal and your ultimate mission. And then the people that are really aligned with that goal and that mission, they're going to do exactly what you as a community leader are doing, which is you're ignoring the price swings that are heavily driven by speculation. And you're going to focus more on the mission and the purpose. To start, Jump is not tradable. And I don't even know when the Jump token will be tradable, whenever it makes sense. Right now, you have to earn Jump. And that's sort of the first step towards putting the token in the right hands of people that want to use it for the purpose and the utility that it's designed.
Yeah.
Is you have to earn it. And right now, to date, we've got about 150 beta members. We've got 80 agencies represented from across the globe. We've got members from Shopify, Netflix, TikTok, Prudential, Amazon. And so these people have essentially earned the token by being the first to request access. And sort of the way I went about building the community is I wasn't super public about it. I posted on my own social channels, posted, and sent out emails to, really close colleagues that I respect and who want to innovate. But as far as like mega PR releases or some like super fancy website that explains what Jump is, I stayed away from all of that. And it was really just, hey, this is Web3. We're going to learn about it. It's Jump, request an invite. And so those people that were essentially very curious minds and heard just enough of the story and made the effort to request an invite without knowing much. And then I had some Zoom calls to sort of onboard people. Essentially, their first reward for being curious people in this field is to receive Jump tokens. That's their first reward. And then moving forward, we're about to enter season 1, and we'll have 2 teams. We'll have an events team and a research team. And essentially, to enter the community, you'll have to contribute to the research or the events team. And by contributing to the community, you earn tokens, which then give you more access to the community. And at some point, whenever those tokens are tradable, it'll make sense. Obviously, when you start putting tokens into the wild, anyone can set up a liquidity pool and start trading the token. That's just the nature of the game. But it's just like, once you start selling t-shirts, anyone can create a secondary market for your t-shirts. So it's not like it's that different. It just happens at a much quicker pace and probably a much bigger scale, especially coming up throughout the years.
Yeah, I love how controlled and how focused it is on trying to achieve like not a validation, but kind of getting the initial energy built up within that community before scaling it and getting it much larger, right? Because obviously there's a problem that needs to be solved here, right? And the social tokens solve that through community coordination, right? And validating equity, right? And validating proof of participation, et cetera, right? And the beauty behind what I like that you're doing is you're keeping it controlled, but also you're aware that there could be, quote unquote, a bad actor within that wants to take his experimentation to just another notch and create a Uniswap pool or a Sushi swap pool and create an ETH pair, whatever it may be, whatever the token pair may be, right? And just put it out there in the wild and allow more members that you necessarily wouldn't have wanted to join get into the community. And I think when creators are kind of thinking about how do they build their social token community, whether you're a Lil Nas X and you have a fan base of millions, or you're an individual like yourself that wants to create more awareness for a topic, I think there's 2 models: either releasing it out in the wild, right, and letting people ape in, quote unquote, and buy it, or having a core individual sort of mint this on their own in their own wallet, not really create a multi-sig, quote unquote, that's managed by multiple people, but you as the individual, as Jeff Kauffman Jr., you determine who comes in and who doesn't. And I think there's something unique about that with creating that intimacy behind a community. And just to add on to that, I think one of the biggest misconceptions people have is they're aiming for masses, right? They're aiming for millions of people in their community. But what you're proving, it's use case dependent.
Yep, absolutely. And I definitely don't think it's wrong to just sort of release a token and let people ape in and kind of do all that jazz. I think that's more sort of natural for where the blockchain and crypto community has been up to this point. But I do think that, like every industry, there's evolutions and there are different use cases. And, Jump is certainly very, it's very centralized in a sense right now. Now, the goal is to get it to a very decentralized place, but that does not happen overnight. And I think a lot of people forget how long certain projects took to actually get to true decentralization, and aligning with that ethos. Now, at the same time, I think we all need to sort of sit back and understand that there are plenty of reasons to have a very centralized and creative sort of actor, in a sense. And so, like, some examples that I'll give is that a musician, while they might have, or a band might have a token and a decentralized community, the community is not necessarily dictating what that musician is thinking about and creating about, and that exact song and that, like, that algorithm that's in that musician or that creator's head, and how they wake up and how they feel and how they get to that next hit song or that next hit album. Now, there's certainly like that interaction with the community, but that actual song that's being created is not necessarily created by the community. It's certainly created in some sense in tandem. But yeah, I think there's a lot of room for a very centralized sort of actor who partners with their community, but isn't necessarily giving out just full control and ownership and just being like, okay, and now you create every single song and album that ever gets released under my name. And that's sort of like, that's Bitcoin. And, that's the full Satoshi goes into the back, and there's now all these actors that keep that platform up. There are ways to bring, the metaverse characters to life, and this community driven like avatar that's controlled by the community, and that's kind of, that'll be a fun space to play in. But for the time being, while we still have people that want to be extremely creative, allow them to be creative, but these tokens allow them to partner with their fan base in a new way.
What I love about Jump's story is, and I touched upon this earlier, is that you don't need to, like, you can be centralized and still utilize decentralized technologies. You don't have to go from 0 to 100 instantly, right? There's a process to it, right? And for future creators who are looking to experiment on this, whether, again, you're Lil Nas X or Jeff Kauffman Jr., there are stages to releasing and becoming more quote unquote decentralized, right? And you're seeing a lot of these fair launch models kind of go into the ecosystem. The biggest one comes to mind is Andre Cornjay from, and I feel like I'm butchering his last name, but from Yearn Finance, right? And he's very big on this ethos of fair launch, no pre-mine, no VCs, none of that stuff. Here's a project, here's a problem I tried to solve. You guys do what you will with it, right? I'll still develop, but it's two different models, and I think it's a misconception that people have with, like, okay, man, how do I go decentralized, right? Initially, like, I don't even know the first thing about decentralization. I grew up in a society where all I've known is centralization. I have to rework my framework and the way I've kind of approached. Like, people don't realize that there is no CEO necessarily. There is no CMO. There is no executives that kind of manage. There might be nonprofits that help fuel and fund these ecosystems, but the majority of the traction, the network effects, happen many times beyond someone's control.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on, we grew up with centralization. Even though we've got a whole new, generation of bright minds that are coming into this space, they still grew up with centralized school, centralized government, centralized healthcare. Centralization centralized family, right? And there's not necessarily that's not all bad, but that is a behavior that is good, that is so hard to sort of unlearn. But we do need to get there. I think I'm a huge fan of decentralization, and we need as much of it as we can. But you can do it in a very progressive manner. And so one of the things that I challenge people to do in launching sort of a tokenized social tokens and community tokens is to think first about what is one single behavior that you can decentralize, one single thing, and get really good at decentralizing that single behavior. And then, you'll start to lay the foundation and the sort of the culture to sort of spread that. And then maybe one day you can become a fully decentralized, you can actually become a DAO. Because right now most DAOs they're DOs, they're digital organization. It's not decentralized and it's not autonomous. But that's okay. It doesn't have to start there. And so as long as you're upfront with your community, even if you're calling yourself a DAO, no big deal. Just say, hey, we're not fully decentralized yet. It might take us a year or two. I think 2 years is quick. It might take us some time, especially when we're talking about culture and human capital, because that is much different than just software.
Yeah. I think that quote right there, one behavior at a time, right? And starting small, one baby step at a time, one stair at a time, right? And building from there. When people enter the space, it could get very overwhelming very fast, right? And that whole point of view is like, okay, and I want to pick your brain on this a little bit more. Designing one behavior at a time, how do you approach that? What does that look like? So let's talk about it from Jump's point of view for a minute, okay? You're trying to build a network of like-minded ad agencies, ad tech, marketing tech, et cetera, people to educate them on the future of Web3 and what it could become. That's the vision. That's the mission. That's the goal. What does that first behavior look like in your ecosystem? How does that look like from your point of view?
So the goal is to decentralize research and events. So kind of going back to the two teams that we're going to launch. And so the way we'll do it in classic agency style, which is there's always a briefing, and you start with a briefing, and then you move into a brainstorm. And then those ideas that kind of the community rallies around will then formulate into the working groups and the projects within research and events. And so in that sense, the ideation of what projects fall were within research and events was very decentralized. It was the community kind of came up with it. Now, I had to kick off the process, which was a very centralized sort of planning and structure. Then I have to do the work within Discord to set that up. So that's very centralized. And so there's centralized components of bringing that together. But that first, that would be a huge success for our community, just to brainstorm on what the working groups would be, and then come to consensus on those working groups, and then to start working in those groups. And then if we sort of map that out several months and maybe a year or two, the ideal scenario would that an event idea would happen or would come to someone. They would start organizing the community around that idea, and then that event would happen. Done. And that's
the vision. That's
decentralized, and that came to life without any centralized actor within the Jump community. So how do I empower that, and then in turn create others in the community to sort of empower that? And so one of the things that we'll have within Jump, as soon as the community reaches a little bit larger scale, is we'll have what we're calling city nodes. So ways for agencies and people that are in the same city to connect. So if Jump can sort of put out the resources in the form of tokens to hold a local event, and then that bounty and that event just happens and it's grabbed and it just goes with very little oversight from or no oversight from the centralized team and the Genesis team, if you will, then we'll start to see that actual behavior kind of come into life, hopefully pretty soon.
And the reality of what you're saying on paper, it sounds fantastic, but the reality of these organizations is that as you build towards decentralization, you're really banking on the fact that you're going to have a lot of self-motivated and self-disciplined individuals, more leaders, less followers, right? To an extent, right? And in a world where society has only so many leaders and more followers, right? How do you avoid the bureaucracy that will come and streamline efficiency? I think it's a problem that a lot of DAOs, true DAOs, haven't figured out just yet. One example comes to mind, and I'll let you answer after this. One example is Friends with Benefits. They introduced season 3, and they basically have leads managing events, projects, this and that, right? And with those, you have core individuals that get, I guess, I don't know what the pay is, whatever it may be, but they basically get compensated from the DAO and become essentially like decentralized employees, contractors, from what I understand, right? And they are like the leaders that coordinate and manage specific departments. How do you kind of view that when, one, all these people, they already have full-time jobs, right? They're working at Amazon. It's already consuming a lot of their time. They're working at these ad agencies, et cetera, et cetera. How do you build a system that motivates and incentivizes leadership versus being a follower?
Yeah, man, that is a $1 billion question. Right? Whoever unlocks that is going to start really, because what we're talking about is we're talking about coordinating human capital and not financial capital. And that's what's so fascinating about this space. And so in the absence of being able to perfectly program everything into software, then you have to start relying on the human brain's form of software, and you have to sort of have these centralized actors. And so that's where you need even stronger leadership. And I think that when we start to talk about the bureaucracy of organizations, actually, I feel like that's when leadership is breaking down, and you're having weak leadership. And so you've actually got to somehow cultivate even stronger forms of human leadership when you're really relying on a decentralized team to self-motivate, self-act, and do it without a lot of oversight. So really, the future is the stronger the leader, I think the more likely they're going to gravitate towards this sort of environment, because really strong leaders, they don't want to micromanage. They want to empower people. And these systems give them a lot better opportunity to do that. And so I think we're going to naturally see our strongest leaders in business and society start to gravitate towards this sort of model. And when you have strong leaders, I think that's what gets us through the bureaucracy component until we can start to code the coordination of human capital into software.
Yeah, it's a great point. Let's pivot for a minute and talk about the future of digital marketing, the future of advertising, from the first point of view of decentralized social networks. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the platforms right now, their business model is ad revenue, right? Probably other miscellaneous like fields, whatever, but majority ad revenue. I, as a Facebook marketer, I can go on, set up a campaign, target a specific audience based off their interests, demographic, whatever. People become the product. But on platforms like BitClout, it's no longer that scenario, right? How should digital advertising agencies, and I guess also brands, and it's probably two different answers, how should they be viewing decentralized social networks when it comes to engaging with their core communities and their customer base?
Yep. I love this topic because I think the natural place for a lot of people who are not deep in the world of advertising and marketing and actually care about doing it in a way that has a lot of quality and adds value to the person that's being spoken to and the brand itself. I like to use a couple old school examples, but I also like to start with a quote from Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1. Which was, you have product and you have marketing. And unless your product is at least 10x better, then the user switching costs, people won't try your new product. And you're like, what? Why not? It's 5x better. But the end user, whether it's a business customer or B2C sort of play, the switching costs are too high, especially when demographics start to get older and you're having families and you're buying houses and you're working, your parents, are getting older and whatnot. When you start to hit, the later 20s and your 30s and your 40s, switching costs become really, really difficult. And so I love sort of how Peter Thiel sets that up. And he's like, well, if your product's not at least 10x better, then you're going to have to win with marketing and you're going to have to build a brand. And so what is marketing? And that's where a lot of people just kind of go to, oh, marketing, if they're not in this sort of field, they go straight towards, oh, it's an ad. And that's just one tiny, 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 tiny little sliver of marketing and what marketing is. But it's really important for us to think about, like, as we move into Web3, there will not be a less need for marketing and advertising. There will be a greater need. And the reason is there will be more decentralization and a greater importance on building your brand, whether it's a community brand or a protocol brand or whatever the mission is. There will be a big need to build that brand and do it in the right way. So I see marketing's evolution is actually coming into a bit of a golden age and I think a better place than where we've been. And what I hope is that when we look at marketing budgets and where marketing budgets go, we're talking about, the analogy is the Fortune $1,000 marketing budgets and ad budgets are almost, it's certainly not at the level of the institutional sort of hedge funds that are now considering buying Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? But it's the institutional equivalent of branding and communities and all of that. And so unlocking those budgets in a new way and bringing those budgets into Web3 is going to just fuel the growth of the ecosystem. And what I hope is that what I hope gets removed out of the advertising and marketing ecosystem is rent-seeking marketing dollars, where it doesn't add value to the experience or the end user or necessarily the brand. And essentially that's what Facebook certainly has become. You're renting your audience and your ad presence doesn't add value to the experience. And that second part is so important. And I'll go back and I'll use a skydiving example real quick. One of my favorite magazines when I was jumping was Parachutist. And in that magazine, there were a lot of ads and I loved every single ad. Why? Because it was the builders and the creators and the event organizers and all the people that made up the community were essentially advertising in that magazine. And in that sense, those products and those services and those events added to the community. And those ad dollars fueled the magazine, which supported the community. And so I actually think there's a huge opportunity for ecosystems and brands to actually advertise within their communities. And it's actually a value add, even more so than the magazine example that I gave, because I was just a membership of the United States Parachute Association. Well, what if that was tokenized? And so instead of buying an annual membership, I actually bought tokens. And those tokens trade at a value based off of the value of the community and the desire of people to be part of that community. And so that's where I think that there's actually sort of this opportunity for advertising to, again, start to become a value add. And the problem with the print industry and the television industry and a lot of those advertising sorts of channels is that we're talking about atoms, and paper is actually really expensive and it's hard to scale. And so it's hard to create real strong business models around really tight and small communities that can support themselves. And so I think that we can start to reimagine the world of advertising, because essentially the cost of the media has come down. Hopefully the cost of, or the creators that are creating that are being compensated fairly, unlike they are now. And then those ads actually add value. Unlike Facebook, it doesn't add value to my experience. But when I'm looking at my skydiving magazine, every ad added value to my experience.
I love that example. That's such a clear example. But what about from the point of view of, let's talk about influencer marketing for a second.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's kind of transition into the 5-10 year point of view, where you're going to have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of creators tokenizing themselves and their communities and giving their fans and audiences a ride for their quote unquote money and experience, right? And brands like Nike, like Patagonia, Adidas, the Food Network, et cetera, right? How are they going to be thinking about influencer marketing? And I have a hunch from buying into their networks, right, and buying their social tokens, but I'd love to hear your point of view on that, what you kind of see formulating down the line.
Well, first, to start with Fortune 1000 brands, the idea of them launching a token anytime soon is, especially an ERC20, like social token, sort of like that, that is actually a long way off. I think it's the legal component of a publicly traded company launching a token like that, the learning curve, but also just the regulatory uncertainty and risk is going to take a long time. That doesn't mean that the industry isn't going to move forward. What I feel like we're going to see just the explosion of tokenized communities forming and a bit of this mass exodus of attention from Web2 social networks. And so wherever that attention goes, then brands sort of need to go there too. And so what I hope that happens, what I believe will happen, and what I hope the Jump community sets the best practices and standards for, is that when I work with a brand, we want to develop, we want to essentially build that brand. And so what is a brand? Is a brand a logo? Nope. Is it a product? Nope. We like to define a brand as a promise. And it's the promise that you're going to live up to X, Y, and Z as best you can every single day. And that's where you have to like really work hard to outline your brand values and then how that translates into goals. And so if you're Patagonia, which is a great example, they've been doing this for a long time. They're famous for saying we don't spend dollars on advertising. Well, they spend a lot on marketing, because marketing is not just placing a single ad. But what you can start to see sort of formulate is brands that really understand their values and their goals and their promise that they want to live up to every day. Hopefully those brands are making the world better through whatever product or service they're providing. Hopefully we will be able to, as an industry, match them with tokenized communities and influencers that just share the same values and goals. And so when you start to think of like, what are the goals and what are the values of this community, and what brand can actually come in and play a sponsorship role to help them achieve that. So imagine sort of, what would Jordan be without Nike? Where would Jumpman as a brand be without Nike? And that sort of combination, how is that going to play out when we start to see the upstarts of these brands start to align with these creators and or communities? And essentially the brand comes in, and rather than spending, Facebook generates $25 billion a year on ads, 80% of which comes from 100 advertisers. So 100 advertisers are footing the bill for the entire ecosystem. Most people don't know that. What if those brands start to redirect their dollars to communities that align with their goals and values and start to support those communities? That's where I hope we see things going. And the reason we couldn't unlock that before is it's just really hard for a community to capture the value and unlock their own social capital. Tokens give them a way to do that now.
Wow. That introduces a whole new rabbit hole to fall down.
Yeah.
Like brands reimagining, companies reimagining how they're investing every single penny rather than spending it on these paid ads, which all these drop shipping models, right, that kind of came into existence, and all these new freaking brand to end consumer companies that drop ship products from China, from local US whatever it may be, right? You're telling me right now that they're going to have to reimagine and actually plug and play into these individual ecosystems, which
Mhm.
on one end, that makes me think it's a very daunting task. How do you find and source all these individual communities that align with what you're looking to promote and get out there? And two, and I guess this is more of like a question that we can talk more about later, but I think it ties into it. It's like, when these tokens fluctuate in value, how does a brand really determine what they associate themselves with or not? Does a token price determine that as well?
Oh man, that's a big question. I think if we're really focused on our goals and our mission, then we're not concerned with the price, whether we're a brand or a community. We're looking at, like, it kind of goes back. If you look at early 2000s videos of Bezos talking about Amazon, and he just
I love those.
I don't care what the stock price is. Like, did we deliver more products? Did we improve our shipping speed? Did we bring price down? Did we give people more selection? And are those the metrics that we're focusing on and holding ourselves accountable to? And I think if you're doing that, then the token price just kind of becomes a thing that, it's obviously going to grab some attention, but ultimately, if that's the focus, I think any community is going to fail.
So just to touch up on that one point, the first point, so how do brands find these communities now?
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, right now they live in Discord. A lot of them do, okay? But how many Discord servers can you jump into? Discord also limits you with how many Discord servers you could join, right? So how do you do that, right? How do you find these communities to tap into?
Absolutely. So we're super early stage. One of the event teams that I hope will gain traction within the Jump community is what we're hoping to host, the first ever Web3 ad tech and MarTech hackathon, to start to build the tools that will help brands do this. So, okay, let's fast forward 2 years from now. We've got 1,000 tokenized communities that have members of 50,000 people or more. As soon as we got 50,000 people, that's a decent sized audience to sort of like communicate and work with. And certainly if we're talking about tokenized communities in the millions, those are really important communities to get into. And if there's a lot of them, it becomes tough. Okay, so how do you do that? You start to look at some form of user interface that will allow you to sort of survey the landscape, look at what this community is about. And there's all sorts of data points that you can sort of pull. So if we use just a Web 2 example, very common to leverage social listening tools, put in a couple keywords, and then you start to build this cloud of emojis and other words and other similar accounts that sort of linked, and you kind of start to understand what that social graph looks like, and you can start to understand if that's the influencer that you want to engage. And so what I anticipate happening is, as these tokenized communities form and scale, we're going to start to need to have these tools that are essentially a next generation of social listening and community management. And so, those are the tools that we've got to start building. And that's part of what we hope Jump's role will be. And when you imagine that world of brands and agencies and entrepreneurs aligned around a token, you start to see that as a community, we've actually created the supply and the demand, and we're aligned with the token around the creation of those tools.
I love it. It's super powerful. When do you think all this is going to come to fruition? Like, when are we going to, like, right now, obviously Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, et cetera, these are things that we use and we rely on.
Yeah.
When do we start, kind of like, how many years? What's that roadmap, you think? Predict, throw a number out there. What do you think is going to be that point where we feel comfortable with Web3 tools and strategies the way we do with Web2 tools and strategies?
So one thing I feel like we're going to live in is Web 2 is not going to just disappear overnight. I think Web 2 strategies are going to support Web 3 strategy a long time. So we're not throwing sort of the baby out of the scene. But what about the scale of Web 3? And then maybe, when does the flip happen? Right? When, like, mobile took over desktop, when does Web 3 marketing and community building take over sort of Web 2? And so I think on the conservative end, and I don't think a lot of people who are building in the space want to hear this, but 10 years. on the conservative end. On the aggressive end, I think we start to see incredible use cases that set the stage within the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to see a big brand partner with a huge community that has global reach, and they're going to do something together that every brand and tokenized community is going to be chasing after and starting to build around. And so I'm really excited about what that first use case is going to be. I hope it comes from the Jump community. I hope we find the brand that wants to align with the community and do something super special, like clean up the ocean. I don't know. We'll see what happens. So yeah, that's sort of the timeline on it. One of the things that you have to realize about some of these transitions, and one of the reasons why I wanted to build Jump, is I want to speed that up. I don't want it to take 10 years, and Jump is a way to speed that up. And so what do I mean by that? So when you look at these marketing budgets and a lot of these decision making, you have mostly people in their 30s and 40s in sort of the mid-level to senior director type positions and VP positions. And then you have like CMOs and things of that nature, kind of starting in your 50s and 60s. And so we're talking about educating and retraining a generation of people and how they operate. And seeing that change in Web 2, seeing dollars transition from TV to Facebook, and seeing the mental leaps that the CMOs and the senior marketing directors were having to leap through in order to say, hey, I'm going to shift just 10% of my TV budget into social. And then now, they're going to start to have to make those decisions of how do I shift 5% or 10% of my budget into these Web3 strategies, especially when on the surface to most people, it still feels like a scam. And so how do we do that? Build a community around it. Hopefully people learn by doing. Hopefully the Jump experience spreads super fast to these brands and agencies. And at the same time, Web3 communities are rising up, and we can start to create those sort of case studies as soon as possible.
I love it, Jeff. You're a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you for being on. Really quick, before I let you go, where can we find you and learn more about Jump, Parachute? Give us the rundown.
Absolutely. So you can find me on Twitter at Jeff Kauffman Jr. You can find Jump on Twitter at Jumpers Tweeting, and then you can sign up for Jump and participate in Jump at joinjump.community.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.